us down and teaches us how to grow old. And yet somehow we learn it. We learn it through fairy tales where older people slowly fade into the background, through school textbooks where grandparents are always sitting on rocking chairs while younger people build the future, through advertisements that tell us wrinkles are a problem to be fixed, through workplaces where young and dynamic is still somehow considered a compliment. And the strange thing is, we absorb these ideas so early and so repeatedly that they stop feeling like stereotypes. They start feeling like truths. Which is odd because we've spent decades challenging outdated assumptions around gender, race, and identity in the workplace. Why have we done so little to challenge ageism? Why are we still educating people into decline, and who benefits from that story? My guest today has spent years challenging exactly these assumptions. Ashton Applewhite is an author, activist, speaker, and one of the world's leading voices on ageism and longevity. Through her thought-provoking book, This Chair Rocks, her TED Talk, which you must see if you haven't, and years of advocacy, she has fundamentally changed the way many people think about aging. Not as inevitable decline, but as something deeply shaped by culture, language, institution, and belief. And perhaps most importantly, she has challenged the idea that aging is a problem to solve instead of a stage of life to continue living fully. Ashton, so glad to have you on Hit the Reset.
Thank you, Malu. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for that very, very thoughtful and accurate introduction.
Thank you. When you really sit back and look at it, ageism feels less like an opinion and more like an education system. Fairy tales, advertisements, schools, films, workplaces, all of them seem to reinforce the same message that aging means decline, irrelevance, and dependency. So the question is, why do you think society has never seriously questioned these narratives the way we eventually did with gender and race?
Well, first of all, I would shift the perspective a little bit. I know that we are beginning to challenge it. I know that the picture is changing. A global movement to end ageism is underway. I'm happy to give you lots of evidence for that. I think one really game-changing piece of evidence, which is relevant to your listeners who are on the other side of the world because you are in Singapore and I am in New York City, is the World Health Organization launching its brilliant global campaign to combat ageism. That's the name of it, not the name of it in my fantasies. It would have been 2020, but they were a little busy with the pandemic in 2021. So I do think ageism is becoming more, I know it's becoming more noticed and more talked about. And I think that because of the work we have done, people who would rather not be trapped by stereotypes and who would like to have a more equitable world where your appearance or something you can't change about yourself is something you can be discriminated on the basis of. So that's the world you and I want to live in, and a lot of us want to live in. I think the work we have done learning about other forms of prejudice like racism and sexism and is already serving us well in thinking about how to think differently about aging and ageism. So I think in that sense, the ground has been plowed. As to why it has taken so long, I have theories. Another piece of evidence that things are changing is that when I started doing this work 20 years ago, a lot of people didn't even know what the word ageism meant. Is there a word for it in Chinese?
Don't know.
Well, that's something worth thinking about. I'm going to be speaking at a World Health Organization conference in June in San Sebastian, Spain. And there is a word in Spanish, and there is a word in French, and there is a word in Basque, because the conference is in the Basque region. So I think that's another piece of evidence. The word ageism was invented by a wonderful man whom I got to know in the last few years of his life, named Dr. Robert Butler, in 1968, which was the heyday of the civil rights movement here in the United States. He was also American. and the second wave feminist movement were going strong, challenging racism and sexism. So he coined the term ageism to piggyback on that. And, obviously it did not achieve the same kind of visibility. But I do think that is happening now. My best theory about why it's taken so long is, two things. One is that we have to challenge ageism in ourselves before we can take that awareness out in the world. As you pointed out, we absorb these beliefs without challenging them, and they seem like truths, and we have to step back and realize that they are stereotypes and falsehoods. And the other that we are pushing back against, all prejudice requires an other religion, other nationality, other sports team. And in this case, the other is our own older selves. And it's true, we also have to challenge racism in ourselves and misogyny in ourselves. But I think that might be a harder ask because the I don't want to say enemy, but the opposition, the people we are defining ourselves in relation to or in difference from, it starts with ourselves. And that's a hard ask. The business about age not being a problem has to do, I think, with capitalism. Singapore is a very capitalist country. The United States is a hyper-capitalist country, and no one makes money off satisfaction, right? Wrinkles, no one ever died of wrinkles, but the multi-billion-dollar skin industry is focused on the idea that not only are wrinkles a problem, but that you should start investing in. I mean, they are now marketing skincare products to little girls. I think it's mostly girls, in boxes that look like crayons, which are, colored drawing toys for children. And if you can be convinced that something is a problem, you can be persuaded that you need to spend money to stop it or prevent it. And the only way to prevent aging is to die. So that's not a great idea. And of course, everywhere capitalism has spread, and we have seen it's spread to the far corners of the globe in the second half of the 20th century and this 21st century. So there are powerful market forces, and you have worked in the corporate space, corporate forces that want to make money off us, and they do it in one way by framing natural physical transitions and natural physical, because I'm a little uncomfortable using the word natural because what's natural to me may not be natural to you. But saying that, for example, changes in your hormone levels are something you need to fix. I'm not a doctor. There are lots of really good reasons for hormone replacement, but your hormones are going to change as you get old. It does not mean you are sick. It means you are aging. And if the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industrial complex can say, oh, this means something terrible is going to happen down the road, take these expensive pills. That's one reason we know so little about the biology, of aging is we don't include older people in pharmaceutical trials. We don't include women either, right?
No, continuing on what you said, we talk about beauty products. That's not necessarily only to do with aging, because it starts from the time you're born. You're supposed to look pretty, and what is pretty to somebody may not be the same for somebody else. So it's stereotypes saying you've got to be XYZ, right? So this
Ideally,
capitalism happens at all ages.
Thin, white, and young, and blonde. Blonde helps too.
Okay. Yeah, so true. Yes.
And it's of course gendered. The pressures on women to appear to not age are much fiercer than they are for men, although ageism in the workplace is often the first form of discrimination that men encounter, right? White men.
If the research says 1 in every 4 person is going to be about 60 by 2030, do you believe the pace at which we are handling ageism is enough, or is there something more that we need to do?
It's never enough. It's never enough. And and we'll never be done. People say, well, when will we be done with ageism? When will we be done with racism? I'm sorry to say that I don't think we ever will be, because I think humans are tribal and competitive, and we have these market forces of capitalism that are not working to our advantage. And also these are very frightening and uncertain times for people everywhere. And when we are afraid, fear makes us stupid. Fear makes us close ranks and leaves us less open to experiment and befriend and stand in solidarity with people who are not like us or less like us, right? Um, I think, speaking of population aging, it's important to point out that ageism, we are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about a person or a group of people based on how old we think they are. And that includes you're too young. And I'm putting air quotes around the young. It's typically you're too old. We live in a very youth-centric world, and older people experience the brunt of age bias, but young people experience it too. So I think it's really important to frame it as something that hurts everyone everywhere. Workers also, we see now as AI starts to eliminate jobs, we see in the US, I'm not sure if it's the same in Singapore, that it is people just starting out in the job market who are facing the most trouble getting started. So I think it's really important to frame these things as, ageism in the workplace gives employers an excuse, a cover for unfair and illegitimate business practices. I've read that around AI. Corporate bosses say, we let people go because of AI, and they just used the advent of AI as an excuse to lay people off and blame it on AI. And that hurts younger people and older people.
It flows beautifully into my next question, so that's fine. When people talk about the younger generation not getting a job, as you mentioned, I think both of them complement each other, right? I mean, the older people are not taking over the younger people's jobs, so that's
Thank
that's
you.
incorrect to say that so that's happened to me when I've gone around talking to people about getting people, the older people, back into the workspace. They turn around and say, my kids haven't got a job, they're in their 20s, and why are you talking about somebody who's in their 60s? So how do you address that?
Well, it is older and younger people do not typically compete for the same jobs.
Yeah.
It is underlying, that the fear that I was talking about is scarcity thinking and
Yeah.
zero sum thinking, that group X cannot benefit except if there is less for me, more for me, less for you. That is seldom the case. It is
Yeah.
certainly not the case in a world where we had better collaborate and find ways to reach across divides to protect each other and protect the planet from all sorts
Yeah.
of dangerous forces, in my opinion. The idea that old people take jobs away from young people is persistent and false. It is true in very narrow circumstances, like universities, where there are tenured positions, which means you have a faculty position for life, and those are set. There are only so many corporate CEOs, but typically someone who just started in the industry is not competing with that CEO for the job. And the amount and nature of work expands and contracts in sync with much larger macroeconomic forces. The more younger people are employed, the more older people are employed, the more money older people have to buy things and hire younger people. And the notion that there are not enough jobs to go around is called the fallacy of the lump of labor. Look it up. If the only job in town is at a barista in Starbucks, you are going to have old, young, and middle-aged people lining up for that job. But that is a labor market problem, not a too many old people problem. And when the media and corporate interests succeed in framing it as those greedy old people, then they can get away with continuing to exploit both younger workers and everyone who's fighting for some crappy minimum wage job instead of lifting up, the wages and finding a more, perhaps providing universal basic income. I mean, we are going to face major, major labor market disruptions because of AI. I think, I'm not an expert, and we need to find broader fiscal and ethical strategies that, guess what, are going to cost governments and companies money, and they will do whatever they can to avoid that. And scapegoating, blaming this on too many old people, is convenient, false, and wrong.
I think the workforces, most organizations know about it, but why do they still work on such outdated model of human value? I mean, that hasn't changed. I mean, we are
People
progressing
are
when
lazy.
we talk about AI.
The
Sorry.
most I wish I had a good answer other than to throw something um, out the window. One of the most maddening and persistent examples is that they will that there is, is they will is the human resources and hiring end of the corporate situation. They do regularly
Yeah.
interview HR people who tend to be predominantly young. And then the people say, my older workers are fantastic. Often we know, that they do good work. And yet we don't want to hire them.
Hmm.
And that is, that is up to corporations, society. I mean, I work on promoting large scale social change. It is not great for older people in a company, for younger people in a company to see the older people being badly treated and being shown the door and not being given training opportunities because they think, oh, this is not going to be a good place for me to hang around. Another persistent justification, giant air quotes there again, is the fact that most older people have higher salaries than younger people. Well, that's true because they have been working for longer and they have built up expertise and connections which have value to their employers and skills, but there is far less turnover in among older workers. One of the reasons the HR people say, my older hires are working out great is because they are less, they're happy to have a job and they're less likely to look for a new opportunity within a few, years or even months of getting hired. That is a serious cost reduction that is never taken into account in the tired argument that, oh, we can hire two young people for the cost of one old person. Well, how much do the younger people know? And I don't mean to say I'm not comfortable making an old versus young argument because
Yeah.
a younger person can know a lot, and an older person applying for the job can be new to the field and know much less than younger people. So it's very important not to say older people are better or younger people are better, right? The ideal is an age diverse team, right? Just like it's good to have people from New York and from Singapore. It's good to have people of different ethnic backgrounds. It's because that way you have a more diverse perspective. You can speak to a larger amount of life experience and a broader and more diverse customer base.
Yeah. Talking about older people coming back to the workforce, they're willing to come down when it comes to the financial aspect. They're saying we do fractional roles. We have the expertise to give you, and we probably may not want to do a full-time job. We will help out. So it's like it could be a fractional role, and they're willing to come down when it comes to the pay. So that's an advantage which
Yeah, I
they
mean,
do not
it's
want.
not an argument I love making about anyone. They're desperate, so offer them, whatever, and they'll be grateful to say yes. But we have learned a lot, especially during the pandemic and during the rise of second wave feminism. Also, women who wanted some to spend more time with raising their children, which is still unpaid labor done mostly by women. Job sharing, remote working, all these things are ways that we can accommodate different levels of employment and different salaries. We know how to do this.
Correct. Yeah, true. So I spoke to a lot of organizations about this in terms of getting people back. And one of the suggestions I made was, why don't you add ageism as part of DEI? And there were no takers. Currently, the awareness is low, and there is a hesitation to rock the boat. You know, all the more reason to have a structured approach to take it forward, because we love these three-letter acronyms like DEI, ESG for environment, CSR for corporate social responsibility. What are the
What
organizations missing out by keeping this outside the mainstream conversation?
they're missing out on a vast reservoir of human talent. One of the sort of overarching and again unreasoned, biased, and ignorant um, ways to legitimate, air quotes again, discrimination against older people is this notion that older people are a burden, and that they're going to be all these old people who are going to suck all the resources out to sea, that awful gray tsunami metaphor, when in fact, what we are looking at is an unprecedented accumulation of human and social capital that we have in the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. It's not bad for young people. It is great for young people not to be one of a family of 10 that is impoverished, and to have more older people out there looking out for you, helping to pay for your education, showing you the way. It is the opposite of zero sum. Employers, I mean, we know, I just looked up a World Economic Forum report. Oh, the United Nations. They don't have an exact figure because it's hard to calculate, but that says the discrimination against older workers is costing the global economy trillions annually. You have all these people who are qualified and eager to work, and you're missing out when you lay off older people without allowing them, enabling them perhaps to work part-time. You just mentioned, transitioning part-time. Suppose there's all this talk now in the US around gerontocracy. Why do old people run everything? Well, I'll get to that if you want me to. But suppose we had this leap in lifespan is new from an evolutionary perspective. It's not all ageism, and roles and institutions and rituals have not caught up yet. Suppose employers established, just structures that would enable people to transition gradually out of their jobs instead of getting fired and suddenly, becoming without income and without prospects, and pass on what they know. And we know about this too. Mentor, a mentor is a word coined by a man named Chip Connolly, who wrote a book called Wisdom at Work. You might want to speak to him as well, which is an idea that you could be a mentor and an intern. You might know things that a younger person or less experienced person, not necessarily younger, does not know, and they know things that you don't know. Knowledge goes both ways, and ways to pass on the institutional memory. You've been there for 20, 30 years. Not just where the paper clips are. What systems were established across the decades, what worked and what didn't, to share what we know and pass it on, and perhaps keep on in some much lower paid but consultant capacity, so that the older person still doesn't feel, suddenly consigned to the margins, and still has an identity and a way. It's crushing to be told that the thing you liked doing, hopefully, and that you spent decades doing is no longer valuable. And not only that, is being held against you. And it makes no sense economically, and it makes no sense, obviously, ethically.
It seems like common sense to a lot of us, right? They see numbers, they see research papers, they see people talking about it, but still nothing is being done.
Prejudice is
I'm
not
sorry, you would say
rational.
something is being done, but then, is the pace enough? Is the question.
Prejudice is not rational. It's ignorant, and it took me a long time to figure out sort of on my own. I read it, but that, for example, patriarchy, a system in which men have more power, and we live in a patriarchy, newsflash, no one gives up power without a struggle, right? But that patriarchy, for example, is really bad for men. I mean, I think it's accurate to say that women pay a higher price in terms of wages, in terms of security, in terms of emotional and physical security, but it's not good for men either. None of these forms of bias that privilege one group or another, they impoverish us all, and they impoverish employers, because if you work in a place where you see people who are different from you, get to learn from them, being treated fairly and equitably, those are better places to work, and they work better. There is evidence to show that. So it is unnerving, I grant you, and I know you've thought of this many, many times, as often as I have or more, that a logical argument that this is harming your employees and harming your bottom line, costing you money, is not persuasive. But we need to keep making it. Only 8% in the US of corporate DEI programs address age bias. I think that's because people are reluctant to identify as old. I'm 73, I'm old. or as future old. And everyone is old or future old. So it starts acknowledging that and stepping off this sort of habit of denial and changing, looking at our own attitudes towards age and aging.
Sitting on the other side of the globe, I mean, we all envy people in the US saying that you don't have a retirement age, right? An Indian sitting in India will have to retire at 60, but the same person can continue to work in the US till he or she wants, right? So I think that is one advantage that you have in terms of
Yes.
there is no retirement age. Yeah.
Mandatory retirement ages are not legal. I think that is a good thing. I am firmly opposed to any privilege or punishment being tied to, punishment is the wrong word, but a privilege or system being tied to a fixed chronological age, except in childhood, when obviously there are things that children cannot and should not do that an adult does. Bureaucracies need age limits. I understand that, but of course, social policy is a crude instrument. So, mandatory retirement I am not a fan of, because there are always people, or any age limit, because there are always people above that age who can do that thing, and people younger than it who cannot. So we need larger social solutions and alternatives to either you're working and making money or you don't exist and you are therefore framed as a burden. I mean, to give one example, it gives no value to all the unpaid labor that women in particular do in caring. Most caring for older people is done by other older people. That labor is unpaid, but it has enormous value that isn't part of the accounting, right? If I watch my grandchild so their parents can go to work, that is enabling their parents to contribute to the economic engine. So we have a lot of work to do around these larger systems. We also have massive egos. It is not surprising to me that people who wield enormous political power and are super visible don't want to step down. And I think part of that, is a responsibility of older people to think about that and go, yes, I love working, I like the prominence, but I am not going to be able to do this at this level indefinitely. And it is in the best interest of the field that I care about, the company that I built, to train younger successors to step up and step in as I step back.
The way things are today, do you think we need to fundamentally redesign the idea of career itself? Instead of a long linear climb, multiple chapters, pauses, reinventions, especially now that people are living longer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything we know about work is changing. It has been for some time. The Stanford Longevity Center's Laura Carstensen has devised this new map of life, and I'm waving my hand through the air like a set of hills, because we don't because it's no longer sort of this steady trajectory where you figure out what you're going to do when you're in your 20s perhaps, and then you do it for a while, and then you retire, and then you get a pension, and then you die. That is not the path, for better and for worse. People have careers are much more discontinuous. We need to learn more things. It's going to be, you don't have that kind of job security unless you happen to own the company and be lucky. And, to say again, I know that AI is going to disrupt everything. So the old models are obsolete, and we need to think about how to prepare ourselves as an employer, as an employee, perhaps as a self-employed person. How do we best equip ourselves to be able to continue to support ourselves in a very, very different political, economic, and labor landscape?
Okay, I'm going to dig deeper into that. So if you were designing a society from scratch today with longer lifespans, healthier aging, and multi-stage careers, what should we do differently? Would education
I'm not enough of a workforce expert, Malu, to give you a good answer in that. I am really
career.
Okay.
In designing a society from scratch, people are living longer, healthier lives. What do you think needs to change? What should we do differently?
Well, if I get a magic wand and a giant shovel, I get to change everything. I would I would have, humans evolved to live in community. We only since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, hyper-capitalism, we started moving into the cities, and age segregation began to be much more the norm. I think it's at its most extreme in the United States because it's such a big country, because people are so dependent on the automobile, because of the expanse of the suburbs. The most important component of a good old age, and I would think probably, also of a good young age, is social connection. It is our relationships that give life meaning and make us happy from, I really think, childhood on, but I know it's true of later life. People, it's not health, it's not wealth, it is having a solid social network. So I think the most important thing that needs to happen is to re-envision our physical infrastructure, so that people live in mixed age communities from birth to death, because it's not a very new idea. It's called the village, and it's how we lived until maybe depending on where you are. And there's still places, of course, where people live in villages, and guess what? They live longer and they live happier, so that people are in contact with all ages. And hopefully, in my world, you would also be in contact with people who have a different skin color, who have a different, life history. So because I think the new globalized, interconnected world is a fascinating one, where if you are lucky, you can travel to places that are different from where you grew up, and you can see how humans everywhere are so different from each other and yet have fundamental human needs. So in my new world, everyone is magically going to be transported to live somewhere they are not from for long enough to learn the language and learn that basic fact, this beautiful, beautiful fact about how we are all different and how we are fundamentally same in our basic desires. Of course, I'm not an economist. There would be ways, I think we're going to need universal basic income. I think we need, of course, there are lots of things to worry about when it comes to getting older. And those fears are legitimate and real. I am not saying, oh, cheer up, learn more about aging, it's all going to be great. Because there are aspects of aging that we cannot control. One thing we can control is our attitudes. So I do urge people to learn more about age and aging, to read my book, to visit the Old School Hub, oldschool.info, for hundreds of free resources about that. Because the more we learn about it, the less afraid we are. We're afraid of things we don't look at, right? As a child, you're afraid of the monster under the bed. Look under the bed. There is no monster. There are still things to worry about: running out of money, getting sick, ending up alone. But those fears are much more legitimate in a society that doesn't provide a income, that doesn't have social, if you can no longer work, that doesn't provide accessible structures if you have mobility issues, that doesn't have transportation systems, and so on. So in my world, it would be designed where every single doorway, every single building every single airplane would be accessible to people who are cognitively impaired and who are physically impaired, because lots of people are born with disabilities, and everyone who is lucky enough to live long is going to age into some kind of impairment. And there's a saying, that the premise of universal design is that if it works for someone who has trouble, for example, opening a doorknob, so there's a lever, no one ever says, gee, I wish there were a doorknob. No one is like, oh, this darn ramp, it's so inconvenient. If it is necessary for some people, it is, and good for everything, good for everyone, that is the world I want to inherit. Education would be free, healthcare would be a universal right, and everyone would have the right and the capacity and the support to move from birth to death with support and dignity. Because one more point, aging is not something sad that old people do. We are aging from the minute we are born, and the vision I want is equity across the lifespan, that no matter, you can become disabled when you were in a car accident at 20, right? You may age into disability at 80. You may not experience it, but you will be in a tiny minority. And if you are in that lucky minority, you should, in my opinion, be really glad that your friends and acquaintances and family members who are not as lucky and privileged as you have full access to the range of human knowledge and human opportunity than people who are less privileged.
From a policy perspective?
I mean, we need everything everywhere, Malu. I think you need to ask an economist that. I think you need to ask an architect that. I think you need to ask an ethicist that. Aging is the one universal human experience. And again, you have this beautiful paradox of we all go through it, and yet, of course, we each have to adapt in our own unique ways. So my solution is going to be different from the solution of someone who is, lucky enough like me to have, be well educated and be financially secure. But that is going to look very different in Borneo than it's going to look like in Rio de Janeiro. And it's going to look different 30 years from now than it does now. So there are as many answers to that question as there are different cultures and different classes.
The reason why I brought up policy is that unless it comes from the top, a lot of things don't change. For example, education, right? In the past, we had these textbooks. I'm giving you an example, India, where every time there was something about domestic work, there was a picture of a lady who was cleaning the house, cooking, while the guy was reading the newspaper. So when people started talking about gender disparity, they literally had to change the textbooks and bring those kind of examples down. It's the same with this, like we were talking about fairy tales, we're talking about textbooks. Unless somebody at the top takes some kind of an action, it's going to be there, but it's going to be slow as compared to
takes action and reinforces it. It's not enough to hire a person of color or a woman to a newly visible position so you can pat yourself on the back unless they receive ongoing support and unless there are negative consequences for not continuing to support her and promote diversity. These are big structural changes. The benefits are real, but at least, in the US in particular, but I think humans in general are not good at we're not good at saving. We're not good at foregoing a present pleasure for a long-term benefit. And that is why policy, and business practices need to enforce it until, when I was starting out, it was unusual to have a woman boss. People said, oh, I could never work for a woman. Well, guess what? They could, and they did, and it worked out. And maybe your boss was terrible, but she's not terrible because she's a woman. She's not terrible because she's a certain age. She's terrible because she's not a good boss, right? She hasn't been trained or whatever. It does not have to do with the innate, with the category that a person belongs to. It is we should judge and hire people for what their ideas and their record rather than what they look like. It's blindingly, obvious to say so. Education is another field that has to change. We are, in this new labor landscape, it's going to take new skills. AI is going to, render lots of skills obsolete, but it's also going to present new opportunities.
Ashton, when we started this conversation, you corrected me by saying that things are moving with regards to ageism, right? So what gives you the most hope right now about how the world is beginning to think differently about aging?
I think the number of people who know what ageism is. All change starts with awareness. The first country to have a national anti-ageism campaign was Australia. It's called Every Age Counts. It's terrific. And a few years later, they started Ageism Awareness Day. And that is now observed around the world. It has gotten the most traction in English-speaking countries, but Chile, for example, has all kinds of anti-ageist initiatives. I'm not sure why. I'm not a Chile expert, but I know where things are happening. Catalonia in southern Spain also. And that's, I don't know why. I know it's because a few dedicated people decided to make it an issue, and it is happening. Wales, which is part of the United Kingdom, also very, very active anti-ageism movement. It takes determined people who stick with it. And as soon as you start to, the first and most uncomfortable step is to look at your own attitudes towards age and aging. Think about how you use the words old and young. Do you say I too old for that? You're never too old for it, because there are always older people who can and do that thing. You may not want to do it. You may have done it when you were young and you learned what you needed to learn. You may be too lazy. You may be too out of shape. It may be too dangerous. It's never about age. Once you realize, like, ooh, these ideas really like took up residence inside my head, as you described, Malu, when you were like first started to look at this, like these ideas are false and these ideas are corrosive and bad for us. That is liberating, because the next step, and it happens automatically, is you start to see how these negative beliefs are embedded in the world around us and the purpose they serve. That purpose piece, and I know you use that phrase, is really important. They do not have our best interests at heart. And that is liberating. You cannot put that consciousness back in the bottle. And I see that happening everywhere around awareness of ageism. People know the word. They may not know that they're ageist yet, but the first step is awareness, and that is on the increase globally. And I do want to urge people to go to oldschool.info. It is the Old School Hub. It is a website I co-founded with two people. I make no money off it, but there are hundreds of carefully curated resources about what ageism is, how to recognize it, how to look for it in your language, how to look for it in your corporate practices, how to look for it, if you are an employer or an employee, and what to do about it. And, so that education is, of course, our most important tool, which you are contributing to with this podcast. So thank you for that.
Okay, I have to end with this. I loved your book, This Chair Rocks. Now, tell me honestly, do you even own a rocking chair, or would sitting still completely go against everything you've been fighting for?
Well, I have to say that the full title of the book, and it's my own fault for giving it a two-part title, This Chair Rocks, Manifesto Against Ageism. So it is, I would submit that is, it sounds like, a serious book, and it is. I hope you would agree that it is also fun to read. She's nodding.
Yes.
So I had a rocking chair that I really loved in my room as a child. My parents gave my sister and me rocking chairs for our rooms, and I rocked it till it fell apart. I carried it around when I moved to New York, and eventually it just wouldn't stick together anymore. I do not have a rocking chair now. And there's nothing against rocking chairs, right? Rocking chairs are comfortable. They're especially nice if you're nursing a baby, holding a baby, the movement. So I don't know if every culture has rocking chairs, but it's certainly not a Western thing. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with, if your vision of your later life is to sit in a rocking chair and read and have, there is no, this notion that you have to keep being active and want to change the world. No, you don't. We know that that long life and contentment correlate to having a sense of purpose. And of course, the biggest factor ruling against that is an ageist culture that tells you that now that you're past a certain age, or you don't work or whatever, or you have wrinkles, that you're useless and should just kind of shuffle away and disappear. It's hard to maintain a sense of dignity and self-esteem in that. But your purpose can be to buy a new rocking chair. Your purpose can be to see flowers bloom in your garden that spring. It can be to help a young person that finish high school or learn how to play an instrument, right? Purpose can be small, and it's just as meaningful. And you can do it in a rocking chair, or you can do it while you're running around a track. Rocking chairs are just fine.
Just fine. Would love to listen to you for a few more hours, Ashton, but I know you have a busy day, and it's way past my bedtime.
Thank you for staying up late, not making me get up too early.
Yeah, one of the many, many, many takeaways for me from this conversation is maybe the real challenge is not adding years to life, but refusing to shrink life into those years.
Love that.
Ashton, thank you. Thank you. It was an honor talking to you.